Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the...
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I am Frank Capello.
And I am Rivka Rivera.
So Rivka, we're going to be doing a special episode next week. We will be doing, I'm saying this to you like as if you don't already know this. No, this is actually, this is directed towards the audience.
I was ready to play along. I was... Is that the script?
I'm sorry, I stole an acting opportunity from you. I'll make it up to you soon.
Not in this climate.
That's right, we're gonna talk about it. But next week, we're going to be doing a mailbag episode. So if you have any questions for us, could be about anything. Could be about movies, could be about politics, could be about anything. You can email us at moviesvscapitalism@gmail.com. That's movies versus capitalism. Or you can DM us on Instagram. And so next week, we'll be answering your questions. So send them in. You only have a short amount of time.
Do it now.
Do it now. But Riv, what's up? So we're now a week after the SAG deal, or about a week and a half after the SAG deal has been reached, and we now have learned more about these contracts.
Yeah.
I actually haven't dug into this too much, but you have been.
Yeah. My dad was in town, and we were all gonna have dinner. We ended up just watching this, which thankfully they were into because it was in fact 3.5 hours, and but it was riveting. I do recommend if you're into unions and stuff like I think even for they're doing informational meetings. So this is SAG's informational meeting.
Oh, okay.
About the contract. So yes, as you set up, basically in the next few weeks, our members, which are 160,000 SAG members, are going to vote either yes or no to ratify this new contract. And this deal was approved with an 86% vote by the union's board members. So almost everyone, but not everyone. And there's a few really vocal and important dissenting board members, and also just some vocal members who'd kind of been, such as Justine Bateman, who's a filmmaker, and also sister to...
Yeah, Jason Bateman. Yeah, they are
yes.
siblings.
Anyways, Justine Bateman's been making some really important points, and also has a background in computer science. So not everybody is been fully on board with this, but it was important, SAG-AFTRA members are starting to get more information. There is an 18-page deal summary available for members to read. And these informational sessions, however, a really important thing to know is that the actual deal is not available for us to read. The reason that Duncan Crabtree Ireland, he's like the one who's he fielded all the questions, and he's been one of the leads on making the deal with Fran Drescher. Anyways, their point about why we don't have the whole contract to read is it's not ready, even though the WGA was able to read it, that it's going to be very long, and it is not ready. The good faith reading of this I've heard from some actors, because there's lots of feelings happening. The good faith reading I heard is okay, maybe the legal team is really doing due diligence to hopefully make sure all of the language, there's so much in there. There's so much that they're trying to get. And I think a point that Crabtree kept making was that we had nothing going into this. It was a total blank page when it came to AI. So at least now we have something, because without anything, it's nearly impossible to litigate any kind of issues with AI. Okay, that's the good faith stuff, right? Going into this, that's what they kept saying. I got to tell you, I told you this informational session I watched was 3.5 hours. I thought, okay, maybe within 2 hours things will come up. 15 minutes in, me and Tommy, my partner's jaw on the floor, this can't be it. I'm sorry. This was my emotional response, was just this is bad. If I know I thought it was going to take me a while to figure out why it didn't feel good. It feels bad, and I will get into it.
Yeah. So what's in it? What is it that raised a red flag for you?
I want to get into it, but I want to just share a clip. I think before I get into it, what I really found moving was there were a lot of actors who were taking the opportunity to get on mic and ask really important questions. And I think the tone of a lot of this was, we really appreciate what you've done for us, for all the negotiating, but I don't know if this is good enough. And we've all been putting our bodies on the line. You know, everyone's been out here for 118 days. So I just wanted, this was an actor whose name is Karen West. And I just thought she spoke to a lot of these concerns in her question really well. So let's play this clip.
Karen West. I've been, wow, it's loud. I've been a member of SAG since 1979. I love you guys. I admire you. I know you've gotten a hell of a good things for us. I feel, as I told Francis earlier, I'm at that holiday party where everything's going well, but then the drunk cousin shows up, and it's the ugly issue we're focusing on, not the fun at the party. I still have that champagne in the fridge, but I can't celebrate yet because I'm really, really concerned. Our union protects us that when we say no, we don't get retaliated against. Unions fail when they say, we don't need you, we can replace you. They did that a little bit with the SAG commercial strike. We'll just get non-union. So I'm worried about a replica of myself. I'm worried that because this is, for me, an existential moment for all of AI. You know it, I know it. And the intrusion of AI in our labor market. I don't understand if the Writers Guild refused to let AI write any scripts. Why, and I'm confounded where we're letting our bodies, literally, and our body of work to be free to replicate in perpetuity. It's the same fight, and Writers Guild won it. What is the mechanism if I don't give consent, so they don't hire me, retaliation? Who is going to sue them for discrimination? I don't have the money, I'm a working class actor. Who is going to sue them for that discrimination? I've heard that, and on Solidarity, we'll sue them if they have that discriminatory practice. And the other thing is, if we give in to all of this and they can, Ted Sarandos said, we're okay till October because we have stockpiled all these scripts. We're fine. From here on in, they can stockpile all our digital replicas. And if we're trying to fight for more in 2025, and they go, you know what? We got stockpiled you. We don't need you. What happens then? So those are my concerns. I love you. This is difficult. It's painful for me to even have to say this.
One, I like that because you can really hear the emotion that I think is present, which is it's very, as she said, being at a holiday party, not ready to celebrate, wanting to, but recognizing like we still have a lot of fight left, like a huge amount of fight left. So the two things that were most concerning to me that Karen spoke to, the first being what is being touted as a win of saying, there's this issue of individual consent. So prior, when there was no regulations and just the blank page, what was beginning to happen was you might have someone come to you on set and just say, sign this, and you have no idea what it is. Now there has to be 48 hours before you can give individual consent to potentially having your AI being used on your image. There's still so much vague language around that. However, what later comes up is the idea that this is going to be now part of your working conditions. So working conditions are like, if I'm going in for a job and some of the working conditions are, there's nudity in this. Are you okay with that? I can consent to yes or no. If I'm not going to get the job. That's part of the working conditions. Might be location. Do you want to move to Los Angeles? You have the shoots in LA. You're going to have to move to LA. You consent yes or no. The difference between those kind of working conditions and an AI working condition is that AI is just going to be what every job requires. So you might have consent, but doesn't it become an issue of forced consent?
Yeah, and that's what this actor Karen was speaking to in that clip, and very well, I should say. Yeah, it's a real bummer. I mean, I knew a little bit about this as some of the details were coming out, but now I'm kind of like getting the full scope of what was actually negotiated. And yeah, Karen was right. Like, if the writers can win, the writers basically won. Like, you can't use you can't use AI to write scripts, and you can't use our scripts to teach AI. And what SAG basically has gotten is you can, but if the actors consent, and then it becomes a question of, are you going to potentially be turning down work because you don't want your likeness to be used in perpetuity?
And you will be. She says later on, there will always be a hungry actor who will say yes, and they'll stockpile it. Like,
Yep.
there will always be. So the other issue she spoke to, which is really concerning, is collective bargaining. Because one thing people are saying is, and I think something that the union is saying is, hey, this is as good as we're going to get. It's better than what we had. Go with this and fight the fight next time, right? Which I understand. I think the concern, another actor had also brought this up earlier on, was if they're stockpiling AI, how does that affect our collective bargaining in the future? And Crabtree does speak to this. I don't saying, well, they did have scripts and some. I don't think it's the same thing at all. I'm very concerned about that, about how this might weaken our stance in the future.
Absolutely. The way that technology has advanced means that if they get, granted, I don't know how any of this AI acting actually works, but like, I don't know, imagine they get like 10,000 likenesses and then they're good forever. Another big part of this is that producers also need to receive consent for creating synthetic performers, meaning they'll train AI to, watch 10 different actors and synthesize all of their likenesses together to create a fake actor. So if AI can just create fake actors and we get to a place where this isn't already regulated in these contracts, then the studios will just do that. They will 1,000,000% do that. So I tend to agree. I don't think this is enough for the moment. And I think the actors have held the line for so long that this would be the time to just dig in. And there's not going to be a time for the union to have more bargaining power than now.
And who knows? I mean, I'm not sure. I think the big question now is, like, for actors is, how do we vote? If I vote yes, and I'm not necessarily happy about it, but think like it's better than nothing, and I'm personally just so sick of this. It's better than nothing. I think I'm in a place. Brianna Joy just had Ralph Nader on her podcast, Bad Faith, and Ralph Nader was talking about voting from your conscience. And I just feel like, I don't know if I cannot vote on this with my conscience, and my gut says it's a no. For the same reason Karen said, I think you could do better. I also was reading, there's a Rolling Stones article that just came out interviewing Sean Sharma, I hope I'm saying their name correctly, who was a dissenting board member, who spoke about how they felt that it was really pressured by some of the elite acting class and the AMPTP, and didn't feel that in the last days of negotiation they were at their best. So this is all part of it. But I do think in the conversations, my dad, as I said, watched this with me. I appreciated him for bringing me in a broader scope of, like, this is not an actor issue, right? AI is a global workers issue. So if there's strategy, it's going to have to eventually be general strike. It's going to have to be workers uniting over these issues of AI, because I don't actually know. We are kind of alone at this moment because WGA got their contract. And so I don't know strategically what there is. There's certainly no one who's saying vote no and here's the plan. I just know, I think at this point I have to vote with my conscience.
Do you have any sense from speaking to other actors in the union how people are generally feeling about this contract?
That night after that informational, I mean, I had so many people call me in a deep existential crisis. Feeling, I think there was just something about it that just revealed how deep, like, this is the best we can get after this long. It just really kind of pulled the curtain back on how existential of a threat this is. People feeling really dark about it, and I think now trying to find hope and a path through, and, like, confused truly about what the best move is to do with their vote.
Damn. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that the deal wasn't what it should be, and that it's putting you in this position.
And it's all of us. I do think that's going to be important to be like, and I appreciate you saying that, but like, this is all of us, you know, this is like, and I needed that. I needed to remember, like, this is not an actor issue. This is a worker issue. And this is like going to happen. I think, you know, I do think there'll be moves towards a general strike. I do think this is going to become this is going to be a massive, this is just the beginning.
It'll have to be. At some point, there will be enough AI and automation that takes over enough jobs where just only a few people own everything and no one else can make a living toiling for them, then the whole system absolutely falls apart. So we will reach a tipping point at some point in the future for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, that was a pretty on-theme discussion for us, where we're going to go next, which is our conversation about the film Network with screenwriter Josh Olson.
But before we do, we just want to let you know, or rather remind you, that this podcast is produced by the two of us.
Yes, we perform all of the necessary labor to make this show happen.
And as we are trying to practice our anti-capitalist values, we don't sell ads on this show. Instead, we rely completely on community support to keep the show going. So if you're able to support us, please consider subscribing to our Patreon.
For just $5 a month, you get access to our entire back catalog of premium episodes, and you will be directly supporting this show. You could also leave us a one-time contribution in our tip jar, and you can find all of those links in the episode description in your podcast player or by going to mvcpod.com.
You can also help us out for free by leaving a rating and review for this show on your podcast app. It takes 2 seconds, and it's super helpful in boosting the algorithm and getting this show in front of more people, and we really appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Josh Olson and our conversation about Network. All right, we are very excited today to be joined by Josh Olson. Josh is an American screenwriter whose work includes the 2005 film A History of Violence, for which he received an Academy Award nomination, among other accolades. He's also the co-host of the podcasts The West Wing Thing, The Movies That Made Me, and The Audit, which is produced here by The Lever. Josh Olson, welcome to Movies versus Capitalism.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. You know, Josh, I don't think we've actually spoken about this. I only recently discovered that you wrote A History of Violence, and I just got to say, like, I'm sure you've gotten all this all the time, but I fucking love that movie. And I was just talking about it to Rivka beforehand, and she was like, "I love that fucking movie."
Yeah,
we've worked together for like years now. That Sorota
No, I mean, I looked up your IMDb, I think, when we started working together,
Right.
but I just like never had the moment to be like, "Hey, Josh, by the way,"
great film.
Thank
yeah,
you.
very good film.
That one came out okay.
What was it like working with Cronenberg? I'm curious.
Working with him was great. It was an amazing experience. I mean, it's you don't want to get too in depth, I'm sure, but yeah, could not have been a better creative collaborator. Basically, he came on based on my script, and then the two of us got to sit in a room for a week and kind of walk through it page by page and talk, and then it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I mean, you get to see why he's such a great director, because it was all about kind of pulling out the best version of the thing that was already there, kind of, and I mean, it was exquisite. So just one of the best times of my life.
Oh, that's so great to hear, especially from a writer, about like collaborating with the director, you know, that it was actually a collaborative experience. We got the chance to speak with Patricia Resnick, who wrote 9 to 5, and she had the opposite experience, which as soon as the director got brought on, she was basically ousted from
9 to 5 to herself, yeah.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry to hear that. She's wonderful.
She was great. I'm really curious because I obviously know the film A History of Violence, but also your podcast, The West Wing Thing, which is great, and The Audit on The Lever. And so you do a lot of critical thinking from a lefty perspective about art, like we do on this podcast. And I'm curious, as a creator, I've gotten asked this before, and I don't think I have feelings about it, but I'm curious your feelings about it, what the effect of being critical and thinking critically about art and then also creating simultaneously, like what is your relationship to that process?
Oh, I mean, they're the same thing, you know. I mean, I don't even know that they're two separate things. It's sort of, you know, it is the creative process. It is probably more conscious of kind of the analysis stuff that I do, but it all comes from the same place. It's like, Yeah, I mean, I it's not like I'm sitting there when I'm writing something and going, does this pass my sort of ideological litmus test? But, I'm also, I like to think at the point where in my own work, I'm sort of in tune enough with myself and what I'm trying to say that's not an issue. It's like, I'm not going to accidentally write some kind of, insane neoliberal gibberish without noticing that I'm doing it. But yeah, I mean, critical faculties, I think it's you. Any judgment you ever hear me passing on somebody else's work is mild compared to the judgment I pass on my own on a minute by minute basis. So
Sure.
but it's the same thing. It's kind of like you have to look at yourself critically. You have to look at your work critically while you're creating it.
Josh, do you ever feel like you're kind of on an island in Hollywood, meaning that like Hollywood is like a very traditionally liberal place? Do you get pushback from either within the industry, from like friends who work within the industry that like, for having more of a, I don't know, like a critical, progressive, leftist perspective, however you want to categorize it?
It's an interesting question because I mean, in terms of actual work, because I don't write explicitly political stuff. I try to do. I'm a big fan of like the sort of classic filmmakers that Scorsese used to call, or that he's called smugglers, the people who try to sort of like make kind of mainstream movies and kind of smuggle their nefarious ideas in. So I tend to be working kind of mainstream kind of entertainment. I'm not, not writing Oliver Stone films, but you are trying to kind of do things with them and hope you get away with them that. And 99 times out of 100, the problem is not that somebody recognizes what you're doing and goes, oh, we mustn't have that. It's just that they just kind of run a steamroller over it. And by the time they're done, you don't recognize where it all went. In terms of socially, it's more of a kind of, because, certainly my politics have impacted my work, I think a bit, sort of really starting in 2016, because of course, pre-2016, if you were a leftist in America, you sort of felt like, you were out on a lifeboat somewhere and there weren't really that many others. And, the whole Bernie movement was kind of such an eye-opening experience when you realize that this guy that, we all knew about, we all kind of loved when he'd pop up like once every blue moon on mainstream media. And you'd be like, wouldn't it be great to live in a world where that guy was, taken seriously as a politician? And then all of a sudden you wake up and he's filling football stadiums without getting any media attention, and you're like, I'm not alone. And finding out that there are other people, even other people here, who feel the same way. But yeah, it's funny because, LA, as we saw in the last primary, it's weird. I feel like Hollywood is sort of like, Biden town, but considering how Bernie did in the last primary, it's also like it's Bernie land. Mm-hmm. So, the industry is still pretty stodgy and liberal and so forth. But, LA itself, not so much. But yeah, I mean, it's a constant. But in terms of how it's affected me professionally, minimally, I know a couple of producers have, gotten into it with them and so forth, that it's unlikely that we'll end up working together in the near future. But it's interesting waters to navigate, I will say. Yeah.
Well, you picked a great film for us to watch today, and I'm really excited.
Or rather, we asked you to watch it with us.
Yeah, we chose you.
Yeah, this is usually the guest picks the movie. This was an instance, for full disclosure to the audience, that our original guest bailed on us. So Josh was kind enough to step in. And actually, I'm more excited to speak with you about this film.
Oh wow, who was the original guest? Now I got it.
Wow.
We'll tell you afterwards.
Spicy, Frank. Okay. Yeah. So the film that we are talking about is Network, which came out in 1976, directed by Sidney Lumet, written by Patty Chayefsky, starring Faye Dunaway, William Holden, Peter Finch, Robert Duvall, and many more. The budget was around 3.8 million, and the film grossed worldwide 23.7 million. The film had 9 Oscar nominations at the 49th Academy Awards, including Best Picture, that led to 4 wins: Best Actor for Peter Finch, Best Actress for Faye Dunaway, and Best Supporting Actress for Beatrice Straight, and Best Original Screenplay. I believe it was Chayefsky's 3rd Oscar win. Network, in case you have not seen it in a while, is a satirical, or have never seen it. If you've never seen it, stop listening to us, watch it immediately. Come back.
Go watch it.
Don't let us screw it up.
It's a satirical film about a fictional television network, the Union Broadcasting System, UBS, and its struggle with declining ratings. After being told he will be fired for his poor ratings, news anchor Howard Beale pleads with viewers to stay tuned for his final broadcast. However, he instead has an on-air meltdown, which results in a spike in ratings. The network's executives decide to exploit Beale's antics, creating a media sensation.
Hilarity ensues, as we said.
So the year, as Rivka mentioned, is 1976. So a little bit of historical context for when this film was released. The United States is about to celebrate its bicentennial with fireworks and nautical parades. Jimmy Carter has just been elected the 39th president. 3 years after being kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, Patty Hearst is convicted of bank robbery and is sentenced to 35 years in prison. That term is later reduced to 7 years. On television, Happy Days is the most popular show. The film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest wins Best Picture, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show wins its second straight Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series. The average family income is $16,000 a year. A new house costs around $43,000, and the retail price for a gallon of gas averages 59 cents. On April 1st, Apple Computer is found by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And also, the Perrier bottled water is introduced in the United States. That's it. That's all you needed to know about what was happening in 1976.
Pretty much.
So, Josh, we usually start the conversation asking our guest, why did you choose this movie for us to watch? Can't ask that question. So I will ask you, why is this an important film for understanding the modern day media ecosystem?
I'm not even sure it is anymore, to be honest. I mean, it's a movie now that, it's hard for some people to get. I was a kid when this came out. My dad took me to a lot of wildly inappropriate movies, so I saw this in theaters as a child. And
about how old?
10 or 11 or something. But
okay.
But it's he was predicting what he saw coming. It was not. If you looked carefully, you could see that he was right. He was not making observations that were common, but he was making observations that, when they were made, struck you as like, oh my God, this guy knows what he's talking about, if that makes sense. This is what media is going to become. And it's been interesting going back and watching this film over the years, because you would watch it as we would get closer and closer to becoming the Chayefsky's vision. And now here we sit in 2023, and Chayefsky's vision became reality so far back in the rear view, it's hard to remember that this movie was predictive and that it was satirical and all the rest of that. It's like, I can almost see somebody watching it today and going, why would you make a movie about this? This is, it's like a slice of life over at CNN. Yeah. It's, except for the amazing dialogue, and it's a fascinating movie on that front. And also because Chayefsky was so good, it's not, how do you say, it's not one-sided, it's not didactic, as much as he is very much railing against a real thing that he really, really, really hates and fears. He's not, his characters aren't black and white. They aren't a bunch of innocents trapped in a world they never made. They are complicit in the creation of the future that is coming to eat them alive. They are flawed at best. It's an amazing, amazing screenplay, and he was a great writer. For screenwriters, one of many things that we love about the film is that, and this is a testimony to Sidney Lumet as well, who is one of the great filmmakers and who understood very much the power of the script. The opening credit in the movie, if you remember, it is Network by Patty Chayefsky. You don't see that credit in American films. You just don't. Because he didn't direct it, he wrote it. And we have this insane sense that directors are somehow the authors of movies, which is a theory that has caused ungodly amounts of damage to not just writers, but I think to cinema and to working people. But yeah, so I mean, it's an amazing film on every level. The performances are, you get some of the best actors in the world just getting to go off at full speed. And I mean, I could go on for hours about it, but yeah, it's a beautiful piece of work. And we now live in an era where, not to go off, but having done something like, I have no idea how many episodes is the West Wing thing, 180. We watched every episode of the fucking West Wing and dismantled the terrible politics of that show. But the fact that, and much of this due to his own kind of campaigning Aaron Sorkin is often perceived of as our generation's Chayefsky. Gives you a sense of how far we have sunk. Yeah, it's yeah. Somebody else pointed out that like his Newsroom feels like his attempt to do Network, except the difference is he doesn't really understand that he should be raging against anything. It's just he lives in a world. Chayefsky understands that the nostalgia these characters feel for a world that is disappearing is tainted by their own kind of flaws and corruption. Whereas Sorkin kind of just romanticizes it, God damn, if we're going to get back to the point when men did the news, it's like.
That's so interesting, your perspective on having seen it at the time, albeit very young, and the experience of watching it back now and feeling like, I mean, of course, it feels like nothing compared to what we see. And yet, I found it because there are so few films with such clarity on the systemic issues in media. We have our networks, we have our morning show, we have versions that we're like, oh, this is doing this, and it just totally misses the mark and has such bad politics that I just think this holds up so well and is so salient and clear. It was interesting, Sidney Lumet said that when it came out, when it opened, everyone said, oh, it's a brilliant satire, but that Patty always said that he wrote it as reportage, sheer reportage. It wasn't meant to be a satire. It was just, as you had said, stating what was being seen. And I would say that holds up. It didn't feel aged to me in a lot of ways. Even though what we see is so much more extreme, it felt so honest and obvious.
Well, measure it against, it's a different medium, but measure it against All the President's Men. I just did, in fact, another podcast where we were talking about political movies, and I always make a point of like making sure, like I flat out reject the notion that All the President's Men is a political movie. It's not about politics. Politics are just it's like saying a movie in which a reporter investigates a murder is a murder movie. It's not. It's about journalists investigating a story. But look at how they do it in that film. They're so ennobled. It's just, there's no questioning of the media that they're in, or the impact it has. There's no even nod towards the notion that there's any kind of corporate control of that media. They're just damn good guys going out to get a story that's going to bring down this powerful person. That's a great film. I mean, I don't mean to, I absolutely love All the President's Men, but it exists in this kind of idyllic, knight in shining armor, journalist as knight in shining armor universe, whereas Network is like, we're 5 minutes away from this happening, folks.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing that Network didn't really account for was like the advent of the internet, which is, how could Chayefsky have known at that time? But what he was putting his finger on.
But even then, there's that Vox Populi episode where it's like, hey, let's just talk to people about what they think for half an hour, which is sort of like opening the door.
You're absolutely right. I mean, a little bit of background for anyone who doesn't know, Chayefsky has become this commemorated screenwriter of his time, and he personally, as he's watching, news develop throughout the 70s, he personally is like, I fucking hate this. I hate television. I hate the medium. I think it's dumbing down our discourse. I think it's sensationalized. I think everyone is just pushing for ratings, like the corporate influence, the profit motive. So he seeks out to write this script as basically what he deems the cable news industry. He spent a lot of time in cable newsrooms where he said he was shocked by what he saw.
Cable news was not a thing.
You're right. Yeah, thank you. TV news. And this is the script that came of it. And I was blown away in this rewatch because you're right, like Sidney Lumet, it cannot be overstated how brilliant his blocking and his framing is in this film.
Yeah, he's incredible with actors, and
throughout, there are just so many shots in this movie that just are like burned into your brain in the creative way that he's found to frame it. But even with the mastery of the filmmaking, it is still the screenplay that shines through more than anything, which is, I think, a testament to everything that we're talking about, specifically his critique and the dialogue that he writes between these characters is just so rich, and it just made me so sad. Rivka and I we met in acting school, and so we would, we audition. I don't anymore, but Rivka still does. But you get sides for stuff, and you're like,
who the fuck wrote this? This is dog shit. I could have wrote this morning and it would have been better than the shit they're handing me. So yeah, it's a pretty phenomenal.
Now that the writer's strike is over, I am allowed to acknowledge there are some bad writers in our union. But ask me during the next strike, and I will have to call you out, sir. Yeah. I mean, and it's a testimony to Lumet too, because who was such a great director and so confident in who he was. There's so many. I mean, there's so many giant directors who aren't. That he didn't feel any need to, as with everything he did, it was like, what's the best thing I can do to serve this script, this story? So there's no point do you see him going, oh, wait a minute, how do I make this feel like a Sidney Lumet film? What can I do to remind them that I'm here? And he's like, no, man, just shoot the fucking thing the way it needs to be shot and get the best actors you can and direct the hell out of them and, do what a great director is supposed to do. I love him so much. It's
To that exact point, I'm sure you know it, Josh, but there's a famous book that Sidney Lumet wrote called Making
Yes.
Movies. And in it,
Yep.
he talks about the framing of Network and how, because the movie was about corruption, they corrupted the camera. So you notice it starts off with a very naturalistic look. And slowly by the end, it's totally a commercial. So the objective was that the camera would also become a victim of the television. And I think that is just that's it, is you are so tuned into the script and the purpose and the intention and the political intention of the film that you know how to move your camera and all the parts of the picture around that effort. And that's when you have a great film like this.
He was a big fan of stuff like that, where the effect would be very slow and you would never, nobody notices that stuff without Lumet pointing it out to them. And only when you're stuttering film, and it's like, but the impact it has on you is immeasurable.
Yes,
because you're looking at a different movie by the time it's over, and you're like, when the hell when did that happen? It's like it's been happening in every shot.
Josh, you mentioned about how these characters, which I really, really appreciated, how these characters had room to be complicit. We didn't have to feel, as we so often feel in films about capitalism that sort of ruins it, that they're just greedy at the end of the day, or it's not their fault, or everyone's a victim. And it captures something where certainly we see everyone complicit in the system, but it still maintains the clarity of the system. And there's all this nuance around. It didn't feel as simple as, oh, that's a inherently greedy person who potentially was just born greedy, and yet it also doesn't matter. We just see them functioning in this world. And I was particularly struck by, I think Diana Christensen is one of the best characters ever written.
She's great.
And she especially, I love this character because she particularly is the opposite of, this beginning of this girl boss that really started, it really took off in the 80s and then just made a comeback in that millennial, we love to say girl boss. Yeah. But when I think of that, it's the her maniacal capitalism and her ambition isn't celebrated because she's a woman in this film in any way.
Right.
In fact, it's unapologetic, and it's very clear that it's somehow associated with the patriarchy in a way that doesn't feel like her feminine side is being taken away. It becomes very clear that it's part of that system, and she's also suffering from it, right? She's
not
alienated and
she's
dissociated.
She's not written gender neutral. Yeah, you couldn't just drop a male actor into that thing. She's definitely
exactly.
But Chayefsky doesn't have, and this comes before. It's after the kind of the women's lib movement has really hit. I think Ms. Magazine started coming out a couple years earlier and stuff, and Chayefsky's. Clearly, it's one of those things where, he's like, yeah, sure, fine. He doesn't fall prey to the thing that comes later, as you say, the girl boss thing. There's no, in Chayefsky's mind, it's like, yeah, of course women can be as mercenary and fucking horrible as men. Now, can we get on with our story here? Instead of having to dance around her gender as though it's, a separate from her and separate from capitalism and all the rest of that stuff. She's an amazing character. William Holden, too. I mean, I love his he can't help but be drawn to her as much as he knows it's bad for him in such an interesting way. And he's such a dick. That amazing speech he gives to his wife, where you're almost going oh, wow, I get it. You're like, what an asshole. In spite of the fact that it's but it's such a good speech because it's so self-serving. It's what he tells himself,
Yeah, I really hated him. really didn't sit well. But I felt like I had permission to hate him. It didn't feel like I was having that experience of hating him and being like, oh, I'm supposed to like him. I was like, oh, I don't think I'm supposed to like him. And I love that.
Yeah, he's just one of the least awful people in this story is all.
I feel like maybe the choice for Diana's character to be a woman, it felt more of like a generational commentary than it did a gender commentary. Because like, you know, in this world, all of these old guard, you know, TV producers like Max, you know, the anchors like Beale, and then obviously corporate executives like Robert Duvall's character, those are all going to be white men for sure. So I thought so I feel like maybe Chayefsky's choice to make Diana and then also Laureen, both women, it felt like more of a generational choice than something that was going to be like strictly commenting on gender. Because I feel like,
she's also, Laureen Hobbs has also got a kind of Angela Davis thing going on as well. I mean, there's a kind of
definitely.
I think. And that's an aspect I think is really interesting in the film because our perceptions of these things change with time, especially our perceptions of representation. And I've spoken to people who are, you know, they think it's a problem with the film that the only black characters are this Revolutionary Army that's completely selling out for money. And that is the era we live in now. If you were going to make this film now and you wanted to make the point clear, you'd have to make sure, and you would, of course, it's 2023, so there would be multiple opportunities for almost any of the characters in this thing to be black, which back in 1976 or 75 when they made it was not the case. But also, you know, you have to understand that the perception of the kind of characters that she represents were pretty revered sort of in certain circles. Chayefsky is not, I don't think he is holding them up to make fun of them. If anything, I think he's holding them up to show the incredibly corrupting influence of TV. It's like he wants to take somebody that, you know, the audience that he cares about reaching, because, you know, you're writing at a higher level then too. You're not worried about reaching 4 quadrants. He's like, I'm writing to people who see the world kind of the way I do to some extent, trying to scare them, and choosing this kind of black Revolutionary Army. They are going to be, to that audience, they're actually going to be kind of sympathetic. So it's not like, you know, if you made the film today, your only black characters are just these like, you know, amoral hacks who sell out for $1. It's like, if anything, it's the opposite. It's like, look what TV does. It takes these people and corrupts even them.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that's part of what's so brilliant about it is every movement, including the gender, is being co-opted for shareholders. And it's got such a clarity on that from the beginning that I never felt that anyone was being made fun of or minimized or blamed. Everyone was part of that system.
You can see how somebody today would think it was him sort of like, you know, criticizing black liberation movements. And in fact, it's if anything, it's the opposite. But again, if you were making the movie today, you'd have to recontextualize it a little bit different to make that clearer.
I mean, I took it a little bit of like, you know, commentary on the splintering of leftist organizations throughout the late 60s and 70s and how it had kind of devolved into like, you know, the Weather Underground, the Symbionese Liberation Army. So like I felt like some warranted commentary about how splintered the left
there may be a little
become.
bit of like, the old like People's Liberation Front of Judea versus the Judean Liberation Front. That's a Life of Brian reference, folks.
You know what? That's one of the few Monty Pythons that I've never actually watched.
Oh my God.
Get to that. I know.
It's like saying, oh yeah, Citizen Kane's one of the few Orson Welles movies I've never gotten around to. It's
all right. Well, this is why I left the entertainment industry, so I don't have to take shit from guys like you. No, but I totally agree with you that their utility in the film is to show the corrupting force of television, and it's one of my favorite scenes, if not my favorite, when Lorraine Hobbs is just freaking out about the distribution rights, and I think my favorite quote is. Yeah. The Communist Party isn't going to see one dime of these distribution rights. I was just like, that's absolutely brilliant. I do want to get into the Howard Beale part of this satire because that is sort of like the central, it's the central plot of like what everything else in the story is revolving around. So if you haven't rewatched this movie in a while, it basically starts with Howard Beale, who is he's been a TV news anchor for decades. He's at the end of his career. He's about to get fired. And then he basically has like a little bit of a nervous breakdown and announces he's going to kill himself on air. They end up pulling him. They put him back on. And then he sort of becomes what is described as the mad prophet of the airwaves after Diana Christensen realizes that she can tap into something. She says, he's articulating the popular rage. The American people want somebody to articulate their rage for them. And so I remember for the first time seeing this in college and being like, holy shit, like this is a full-on presaging of what at that time in the early 2000s, what cable news anchors had become. And it's sort of like the linchpin of this entire film. And it's pretty brilliant. And I especially brilliant for me because there are moments where in Beale's speeches, you know, when he's lambasting television as a medium, when he's, going after certain, aspects of the TV industry or just like American culture that feel completely right on. But then there are other moments where you're like, oh, this guy's fucking losing his mind. So I think it's a really smart choice that Chayefsky makes to make like some of the things he's saying totally resonant. And then other things are like, oh, this guy's out of his fucking mind. Like this guy needs help.
Yeah. I mean, he's clearly snapped. He's clearly had an episode. But yeah, at first, kind of the stuff he's saying kind of makes sense. But it's broad enough that it connects with almost everybody. That's the great thing about the scene, his mad as hell scene. And, obviously I thought you were going to bring up sort of the Trump of it all too, because there's that. It's like a guy who just sort of articulates or doesn't articulate, sort of inarticulates. Is that a word? Just the kind of general rage and anger that's running through the country. And then we haven't mentioned, and to me, it's like you remove this scene, there's almost no movie, Ned Beatty's speech. It's like he's confronted by the real God, not the one who comes to him at night and says, because you're on TV, schmuck, but the actual God, the sort of the corporate control of the world. And Ned Beatty has a speech. It's about 4 minutes long. That is just one of the greatest speeches in the history of film because it just tells you how the world works. and then he goes off and preaches the gospel of the corporation after that and is broken.
And it's so telling because, I think what Chayefsky nails in the early part of Howard Beale, where he's just, quote unquote, articulating the popular rage, is that there's no actual analysis in what he's saying. There's no actual, he's not actually finding the systemic problems and pointing them out to people and explaining how things or why things are happening and why you should be angry about them. In fact, in the I'm mad as hell speech, he says, don't call your Congress people, don't write, don't do anything. I wouldn't know what to tell you even if you would. Which I thought was just so perfect because like that is what Donald Trump does. That it's just like we should be angry and I will be angry, but the reasons or the diagnosis of the problem is completely non-existent. Or if anything, it's just, if it's like an extreme right winger, it's going to be, the immigrants, the queer people, the whatever, it'll be some scapegoat. But as soon as Howard Beale actually does use actual analysis and diagnose a real problem, which is with the corporate structure of his news organization, that's when he crosses the line. Like that is the one thing that is unacceptable in the eyes of his corporate overlords.
I think it's a really good reminder of how to be critical of messaging and movements now, and even movements that get co-opted really quickly by mainstream media, by the elite. It's a good reminder of, if there's not an articulate issue here and it's just a generalized statement about a feeling and there's not action connected to what this movement is asking for, perhaps it's something I can be critical of, and it's going to be easy for Target or Ugg boots to get behind. They're not dangerous. And so that's just a good, it's teaching us how to look at our movements today.
I mean, I hear it all the time from, people on the left that are like, the revolution is being, bought and sold back to us. And you see that constantly in the way that brands choose to market their stuff today, the NFL being like, we stand with Black lives, or, whatever bullshit, like whatever hollow, empty.
Was the Kylie Jenner, was it a Pepsi ad?
Oh my God.
Oh my God. That was, honestly, that was so amazing that so many people, because that's another thing about Hollywood, is like so many people, like hundreds and hundreds of people who had like say in the room, all got together when they storyboarded that commercial. They cast Kylie Jenner, idea. They got her people. They all looked at it and they were all like, yeah, this is good. No, this is good. This will help people. This is not
the kids will eat this up
offensive.
With a spoon.
Which Boots Riley satirizes really well in Sorry to Bother You. We never actually brought that segment up, so I'm glad we get to come back around to that. It's so well done. But yeah, that was absolutely ridiculous. And you see it all the time. And I think we've gotten immune to it And I think it's important to keep your eyes out for it and question it. I remember there was a debate. I had to talk to a lot of people about why it was so harmful and why people were very upset to see the NYPD walking in the Pride March in New York. And then it's very easy to let that. It's like so easy to co-opt movements like Pride movement,
Oh,
and
sure. Yeah. Sorry. I thought it meant from the right, too, because I was like, aren't there gay cops? But yeah, of course. But then.
No, I mean, the NYPD
it's
was
so
like.
cynical. And
Yeah, no, but I mean, because that march and that movement originally started they were a liberation movement and they were protesting against the police. So it's.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All the ways in which and I think that's what this film really is at its essence, which is also why I thought seeing any movement, it was important for them to show how a leader could be co-opted. And that was the lesson I learned, is like, you can't trust a single, we see it with our progressive politicians. It's really easy for a single person to go in and get co-opted and get whatever happens behind closed doors, whatever they're saying, which is why we need to strengthen our movements so that we can hold them accountable when that inevitably happens.
Yes. So there's no centralized leader that they can lock in a room with Ned Beatty for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a great Bill Hicks routine where he talks about that to some extent, where he said, like, the thing is, if you ever wonder what happens to these people, it's like, say you actually manage to elect a good president. And he says the first thing they do is they lock him in a room and they show him footage of the Kennedy assassination from an angle no one has ever seen before.
Oh.
And then they go, do you have any questions? Like, yeah, what's my agenda, please?
Honestly, probably not very far from the truth. Something I love about the Ned Beatty speech, I mean, other than, as you said, Josh, being one of the greatest monologues ever put to film, he's basically talking about the dictatorship of capital, the rule of capital, and how, money is the all-encompassing, all-empowered thing that binds life together. And something that I picked up on this rewatch, he says, it is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today, which fucking blew me away, because like I doubt that Chayefsky was hearing, people like defenders of capital or libertarians at that time being like, people are just naturally greedy. And like, that's why that's human nature. Human nature is to be competitive. It's to be self-interested. It's to be greedy, which this speech does perfectly, to suggest that the exchange of commodities, that is the natural world. That is the atomic natural, like on a subatomic level, like all humans are here for is for the exchange of goods and services. That's why God put us on this green earth, is to just exchange with one another.
One vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit. All men will, hold the share of stock.
It's brilliant. And it's something that I push back on constantly, which is like, no, it's not human nature to just like be a cog in a machine. It's like we're here to like have fulfilling lives and build relationships and find love. Like that's what life is about. But this articulation of this worldview, which has just become so much more pernicious in 2023, is just like, it's really mind blowing how he was able to see all this ahead of time.
Well, why shouldn't they make a profit?
How it just immediately makes it it's like, this is actually a spiritual, like capitalism is a religion and it's a spiritual solution is the level that it's put at. And you can't question that, like that's the brilliance of religion is what are you going to question God? You're not going to question this shit. And in some ways, I think as in our just essence of being humans who have some kind of need for a spiritual understanding and reasoning and searching for why we're on this globe and this planet, feeling things and wanting to be good for each other, like that actually provides something to a lot of people. And ultimately I think the brilliance of capitalism is it understands that it's beyond economic. It couldn't just sell you an economy, like economics. It had to sell a spiritual solution. And that's what's so dangerous about it.
The last thing I want to hit before we go to the awards is, again, this generational divide that he paints in this film, because I really do think that this is a movie about like the greatest generation versus the baby boomers, and what a corrupting influence baby boomers have had on American culture. You know, he says in the big scene between Max and Diana, he says, "You are television incarnate, Diana, indifferent to suffering, insensitive to joy. All of life is reduced to the common rubble of banality." It made me think, it actually like threaded a needle for me. I read this, there's this great book called A Generation of Sociopaths, How the Baby Boomers Betrayed America.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mom, don't listen.
Yeah, goes pretty hard on those poor boomers, but you know, the two strands that he lays out is like, these are the reasons why the baby boomers are the way they are. He's like, one, they inherited, you know, essentially the greatest political economy of the 20th century that was built by the New Deal and, you know, the post-war boom. And the second part is they all sat in front of the fucking TV. So even this guy who wrote this book was like, yeah, I think TV was a pretty corrupting influence on this generation that actually like sequestered the young from their, you know, from like other social groups at a young age when they were like learning social development, which kind of created a more antisocial streak that ran through the baby boomer generation. So it was nice to see Patty Chayefsky sort of echo the same sentiment in this.
I mean, there's something, you know, I was very dear friends for the last 12, 13 years of his life with Harlan Ellison, who's one of the great short story writers of the 20th century. He was one of the writers who made me want to be a writer. And Harlan wrote a bunch of columns. They're collected in books. The books are called The Glass Teat. They're nonfiction writing. They're amazing for a lot of reasons because it was in the 60s. And I don't know if you know the books or have talked about them on the show, but he was writing in things like the LA Free Press and stuff, political criticism of television, the kind of stuff you see all over the place now at a time when that was highly unusual. I mean, he would take an episode of The Partridge Family and explain why they were selling the Vietnam War using the sitcom, you know, and then he'd talk about how commercials do things to you and so forth and so on. It was amazing stuff, way ahead of its time. And it was also, I would say, like, if you read him and Neil Postman, you sort of have read the firmament of, like, almost all great leftist media criticism. What was doubly amazing is that he was doing it while he was a working TV writer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he knew. So he knew.
That is actually
he
like full
very much from the
circle
inside.
to what we started talking about at the top.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, certainly Harlan was, and was a good friend. And every time somebody wonders how you can get away with doing something like The West Wing and work in the industry, I go like, it's so tiny compared to the blasphemy he was getting away with back in the day that I feel okay. But yeah, he talks about all this stuff, and you know, it was right in the middle of that while all that was happening to that generation. It's incredible stuff. I will say, if you track the stuff down, I'll give one kind of, he is as much a victim of that era as much as he was cutting edge. There's going to be sexual attitudes and, you know, attitudes about other things in there, mostly sexual, that were let's say a tad less advanced than one might want. All I can say is that by the time he hit the 21st century, Harlan had evolved way past all of that. But they're amazing pieces of criticism and well worth your time.
And that's a big part about what we talk about on the show about, you know, not everything ages the best, and it's important to be able to retain like the value in things that even if some aspects of them are a little more unsavory in a 2023 lens.
Well, in fact, just keep going on that. It was one of the conversations I had with him towards the end of his life. We were talking about somebody had just been, I think it was Morgan Freeman, had just gotten into some hot water because he had done an interview and he had been a little bit flirty with the woman who was talking to him. And I could be getting the facts wrong, but the video that I saw, I was watching like a 70-something year old black man from the South, from a completely different era, talking to a young woman. There was, in the context of who he was, it was completely, he's like a grandfather, you know? He said something about her dress. I don't know. It was like a nice dress. The kind of stuff that had Chris Pine said it, you know, age 32, you'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. And there was no adjustment for the fact that this is a much older guy from a completely different culture than the one we're all living in now. And Harlan and I were talking about that. And he said, we're all working to create a world in which the people who come after us perceive us as monsters. So, you know, if 50 years from now, people who share our politics aren't listening to this podcast and going, oh my God, they're awful people. It's like, we have all failed, is my point.
Yeah, we're all destined to get canceled at some point.
That's right.
Well, I think just to add to the conversation, from my perspective on these is like, yes, we have to maintain the value, but also there's value in being critical of what we're like, how we're evolving and our not evolved selves. Because I think a lot of people push to reject, why can't we hold on to this? And I think it requires an identity change, and it requires that kind of reflection requires you to also change who you are. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. And so your heroes are never going to be your hero, that. Right. And even with someone like I don't know the Morgan Freeman situation, but I remember there was a really infamous, I think it was John Oliver with, who was it? It was an actor that he really kind of pushed against, which oh gosh, who was it? But what came out of it was this attitude of, can it just, this is who I am. This is my cult. I grab a titty, I touch a butt. Like, let me be me. This is part of my upbringing. This is part of who I was. It was like, it was okay then. Why do I have to be accountable for like my cultural inheritance and upbringing?
Yeah.
And I think the fact is, as we've shifted and move as we evolve, like it probably was never cool with some of the women, even in that culture, they just didn't speak to it, And so I think there's there's many dimensions to that shift. But one thing, tying back
we
to
can go on for, because it's also, I mean, I have a lot of women friends who are around that and came up at times that just were horrifying to me. And they'll point out that you were also inured to it in the sense that it was like not a thing. In a sense, it was like, whatever. I mean, I've heard horror stories. I've heard stuff from, I was good friends with an actress who was, when I met her 25 years ago, was in her 70s. And the stuff that was to her just water off a duck's back landed most of us in therapy.
Yes.
And, because it was like, it's a system I went into. I did fine. I did great. Yeah, I had a baseball bat. I mean, it's just like, holy shit.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what's profound. And I think actually tying it back to the movie, the lack of sentimentality that I think, and Lumet talked about, even with Diana's character, that he was like told Faye Dunaway, do not play this with any sentiment. You have to play it straight. You have really avoid that. And it's profound now because you really see people in the element that in their time. So even though Max is such a freaking dick, like you were saying, you understand it's connected to everything. It doesn't make it excusable, but it somehow makes more sense than it being excused by some sort of like human nature, that we really are all products more than we like to think of our culture and our time. And that's also why in our leftist ideology, we believe in systemic change. And that's the path, not just you have to be born a better person. Maybe God will get it better next time.
And it's that cynicism that I think sets something like this apart from fucking Sorkin and The West Wing. Like that lack of idealism, that lack of aspirational, like, oh, it's all just good. We're all just good inside. And at the end of the day, we just want like a good, nice democracy. The fact that this film is at the most cynical, or at the least, just paints every character with just complexity. There's just like everyone's gray. It's not like anyone's straight good or bad.
And so that a guy like Chayefsky, who would not be able, I mean, it would be inconceivable that his ideas would be kind of more advanced than Sorkin's today in some sense. You look at West Wing, one of the things that just like clobbered us doing the West Wing thing is how incredibly racist and misogynist this guy is. And, that's not there in Network, and certainly not in the same way. We talked about the Liberation Army and so forth, but that's not the kind of, condescending, patronizing day-to-day racism that you see in the West Wing. And it's like, how is this guy more evolved 35 years earlier than and kind of who we are today in many ways?
I recently rewatched A Few Good Men, and I did not realize how much of that movie is just every male character telling Demi Moore how fucking stupid she is. Like literally, that's literally that is her character arc, is to be told how incompetent she is by all of the men in the movie.
Sure, and also it's Guantanamo Bay too, right? Isn't that what they're protecting us from? It's like that whole big speech is like, what are you're protecting us from Cubans? What the? Don't get me started.
Well, speaking of characters and their politics, Josh, this is the part where we get to the awards for this movie. So we got 3 of them. First award is Best Politics. Goes to the character with the best politics in the movie. I would say probably Mrs. Schumacher played like so brilliantly by Beatrice Straight, because I think like most of these characters, as we say, are very morally and ethically murky. I just think like that scene, her performance is so brilliant. She wins Best Supporting Actress for this performance. It's one of the shortest on-screen performances that still won in an acting category. I think she got one scene. It's about like 5 minutes of screen time, and and she's just like,
to make everything about me. It's also if William Hurt had won, I think he would have had almost exactly the same amount of screen time as she had. But he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor for History, and only had the one scene that was almost the same length. I think only nominated. What are you gonna do? But yeah, I was gonna say Beatrice Straight. Yeah, that would be the one. Sure. Although I don't know, she's kind of. I mean, she's just sort of submitting. You know. I guess she's understanding the world she lives in.
Didn't like that submitting, but also what is she going to do? But what were her politics?
Right.
I don't know that I could tell you what her politics were if we're being true to our own awards. Oh, I know who it is. Is it it's the one member of the guerrillas, the guerrilla faction, the Ecumenical who goes off
Liberation Society?
Yeah, and she's like, fuck this. I can't believe you're fucking
There you go.
selling out
right.
and leaves.
You're right.
There's one.
That's it.
Those are actual politics at work. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, our next award, you guessed it, worst politics, goes to the character with the worst politics in the movie. This is a good one. This is a very good one. This is a stacked competition.
Well, I mean, Ned Beatty, just because he's right doesn't mean he's good.
No, I mean, but I also wouldn't agree that he is right. I mean, he's right in that like this is the world like within capitalism, but I don't agree with him that this is actually the world itself.
Okay, but that is his church. I mean, he worships it. That's
yes.
He's like if Rush Limbaugh actually believed what he said.
I would maybe go with Robert Duvall's character, Frank Hackett, just because he has so much more agency in the film compared to Ned Beatty. Like he's the one like executing a lot of pretty, like ruthless shit throughout the movie. He's the one that
literally executing Howard Beale. So.
And then literally executing, you're right, literally executing Howard Beale.
I mean, yeah.
So I think for that alone, I got to go with Robert Duvall as Frank Hackett.
Yeah, Diana's pretty bad.
That's true.
She's pretty bad. I love it. But she's not great. I mean, she also kills Howard Beale. I think it might have even been her idea.
No, it's a great.
It's
I wish I remember the exact line, but it's Duvall. He's like, well, I guess we're gonna have to kill him.
Yeah, she doesn't put up a fight. All right, our last award is Best Supporting Character, who may be even deserving of their own spin-off. The character that the movie should actually be about, or who you would want to see a movie about.
I would watch an entire movie about the Ecumenical Liberation Society and the Mao Zedong Hour. I think that's rife for like its own satire in and of itself, especially like if you put like a 2023 spin on it, and it kind of we went back to this like the reselling of the revolution back to us kind of a thing. I think that could be. Actually, I think someone should make that movie. Someone needs to point out how these revolutionary and radical ideas get repackaged and repurposed and resold to people, and it performs our revolutionary impulses for us rather than actually allowing us to make any sort of material change. So that's my.
Diana's working at Vice News. She's like,
right. Although I want to see Ned Beatty in his off hours. Like, what is he like to live with? Does he what's the deal? Does he ever make eye contact with his wife and kids?
he just only screams like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what is that about? What is his downtime? That's
or he's just so sweet, or he's like the sweetest guy.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody loves him. I think my pick might be more Diana for me. I know she has a pretty big part, but I could just. Where does she go from here?
All right, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really lovely conversation.
Before we wrap, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap, we like to ask our guests how we as artists and as people strive to practice our values in our everyday life, even with all its complexities and contradictions. So is there's one thing that you do in your life, whether it's like, a practice you engage in, an organization you work with, whatever it is where you get the chance to practice whether they're anti-capitalist values, whatever kind of values in your life?
I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, I wish calling people Nazi pricks on Twitter constituted exercise in life.
It's not.
It doesn't not constitute.
It's not
It's
unhelpful.
just knowing exactly when to do it.
My dad was on the podcast, Josh, and he said he just woke up and said, "Fuck you, capitalism," every day. So it's
There you
valid.
go.
There you go.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know that there's one way. I try to be supportive of groups and people who are doing things that I admire. I wish I've long since given up. It's just fundamental change in character. I am struck. I think it's something I've seen more in men. I don't think it's built into us. I think it's cultural more than anything, because I'm seeing it more in younger women now too, which is, I think, good, maybe bad. But I'm from that school where you're like, I got to come up with a solution to these problems. And meanwhile, my wife, who's every bit as politically engaged as I am, goes off every week, and she's now on the board of directors of an organization, the Hollywood Food Coalition, that does, they feed 300, food insecure people a night. They do amazing work. It's like they've got it down to an art where pretty much every dollar that comes in, pretty much all of it goes towards food to people. And it's like, I revere that. I've gone down there sometimes. It always feels good to do it. And it's like, I'm like, why do I feel like I need to do more when I clearly can't? And she's from that school of like, you see a thing in front of you that you might be able to have an impact on, and you try to do it. I very often, just because of the nature of my work, I've come to know a lot of people, and I've exploited that to connect people in other worlds, in political worlds and so forth, where I try to connect people in ways that can be helpful, just simple stuff sometimes, and just helping friends with great political podcasts get good guests who I think need to be known more in various worlds. I mean, that kind of thing. Obviously, you try to inject stuff into your work, but that's a long-term project, and it assumes that everybody else who's writing is doing the same thing, and that all the subliminal stuff we're putting in there will actually have an impact, which goes to that delusion I mentioned first. And then just I've been a father now for coming up 18 months, and every day is an attempt to instill the best values in the little schmuck in return for what he does for me, which is, I gotta say, waking up being in a house where like one person wakes up every day going, holy shit, I get to do this again. This is amazing. I love everything. He's really good, really contagious. And I think it's an important thing to sort of try to remember in our lives, that it's nice to wake up again the next morning. But I don't know. I don't know if any of that constitutes a good answer, but
That was
I
so
thought that
sweet.
was.
Yes,
I thought that was a
absolutely.
really beautiful answer.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, this was a lot of fun. Again, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. It was a blast.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support the show and get access to our premium episodes, you can go to mvcpod.com to find all of that info.
As a reminder, for next week, we will be answering listener questions. So if you have any questions for us, email us at moviesvscapitalism@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram.
Thank you.
Thanks all.